Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2016 edition of this webinar series, co-sponsored by Aspect and the Aspect Software Users Group Association, ASUGA. He's back. My name is Jeff Tobe, and I hope you missed me. I know that I wasn't with you on the last series, but I'm privileged to serve as your host every other month. We still have a fantastic lineup this year due to your input, so join us every other month for great webinars with world thought leaders. Watch your email for more details. You know, our goal has always been to bring you some of the top international thought leaders on topics of interest specifically to you. And we want you to become a loyal participant in this webinar series if you're not already. If you have any suggestions or questions, just email me directly at jeff@jefftobe.com. That's JEFFTOBE.com with your comments or your suggestions. And before we go any further, I'd like to introduce our gracious and generous sponsor, ASUGA. Shannon is on the ASUGA Board of Directors. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Shannon Scott, and I am a Board of Director for ASUGA. And ASUGA is a free user group that brings together the like-minded users of Aspect. Our goal is to further the knowledge of our members through sharing helpful hints, questions, concerns, or any challenges that folks are running into with Aspect products. And it's a great way to connect with other users who are probably in the same boat that you are. Any current, past, or future user of Aspect is eligible for the free membership. So in addition to this online forum where you can go to share your hints, share your questions, share your knowledge, ASUGA also hosts webinars such as this. Odd number months, we focus on the soft skills, such as this, where it's all about how to improve yourself. And then even numbered months are webinars for more technical tracks or more specific to Aspect products. In addition to the webinars and the user forum online, there's also just a great opportunity to interact with other users through local events that we sometimes hold. All of this information and more is available on ASUGA.com. If you're not a member right now, that's also where you can go to sign up. Once again, it is a free process, so that's always a bonus. And yeah, hopefully I had a chance to meet a lot of you last week at the annual ACE conference. If I haven't, I look forward to meeting you next year. So thank you for your time, and Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. I hope everybody had a great time and a productive time at the ACE conference last week. Before I introduce our presenter, please know that she welcomes your questions throughout her presentation. Just type in your query in the chat box during the presentation, and we'll get to it during our short time together. Also, something new. Yvonne's slides are available in your handout section of your toolbar. So if you want to download those after the webinar, you're welcome to do so. And also to make sure that everyone has access to the webinar after the fact, every webinar is posted up on the web about 1 week after airing, so you can get the entire presentation if you like there as well. Simply, you need to go to www.asuga.com. And as Shannon said, if you're not a member, just join for free and become part of the Aspect community. So let's get on with the reason you're here. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Yvonne Sum has a gift. She draws executives into their deep inner essence to make timely changes in their outer world. She transforms leaders on the go through just-in-time mission-critical objectives in VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Endearingly calling herself a global gypsy, Yvonne is an Australian who has lived in Asia and the Middle East, working with directors, CEOs, senior management, and high-growth multinational corporations. Dr. Yvonne Sum is a published international author on leadership across home and work tribes, and as one of only 267 female CSPs, certified speaking professionals in the world, she's presented alongside many well-known figures. Dr. Sum transforms the leader in you, and you'll find her powerfully intentional and inspirational. Welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you, Jeff. So lovely to see you this morning. Actually, I can't see you. You probably can't see me. We are trying our webcam.
We can see you. We're going to try that something new too. Nice to see you.
Well, we thought, being in the VUCA environment, we should try some new uncertainties for the audience. Well, this morning I'm calling in from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. which is exactly, I think, 12 hours ahead of Eastern United States. And I'm loving connecting with you on your, well, I guess, morning, and it's very early morning for me. It's just a little after midnight. And today's topic is really interesting for me because, like I said, I'm a global gypsy and my life has transformed so many times, so it gives me the expertise to talk about this. Now, what's this VUCA? I guess we need to kind of look at. And for some reason I'm having, oh, okay. VUCA is really the reality of our contemporary business world now. It used to be a term used in the military. And if you were going into uncertain terrain, VUCA is where, you know, people can, you know, get killed if you didn't take necessary precautions. Nowadays in business, I guess we don't get killed, but the business itself can actually die if we don't actually use these skills. So today I'm not trying to scare you, but what I'm saying is that it used to be we left it up to our leaders to lead us out of, you know, difficult terrain. But the business world is so uncertain and ambiguous nowadays. We need to behave as leaders. And today's session, I'm going to just invite you, whether you're actually front-facing a customer or whether you're actually a senior leader, all this will apply. Because more and more we're finding that, you know, we need to act as a leader. And this is what this session is going to be about. Now, VUCA, as written by, I've actually given you a quote here, which is around Kinsinger and Walsh in 2012, wrote about VUCA in the business world, and it was published in Thunderbird Business School. And if you look at the list, it's actually got it spells VUCA for the conditions, but if we also look at the fact that the primes, how we can overcome a VUCA, it also spells VUCA. And that is, in order to overcome volatility, we deal with vision, uncertainty with understanding, complexity with clarity, and ambiguity with agility. What does that mean? Well, in the past, when we think of vision, we tend to think of, you know, leaders needing to kind of create this future image of where we need to go. But really, if you are actually in your everyday situation, we need to actually have a compelling need to move to a newer, better place, even if it's for the end of the day or to the end of a quarter. And what we need to do is actually compel others to come with us, because more and more in the VUCA world we come alone, and in a little while I'll explain each one of the VUCA primes to see how you can actually communicate under different conditions. Because more and more, like I said, the world is changing so quickly, we have no time to learn new skills, so we need to depend on our colleagues and people around us and partner with us with where we might be vulnerable. And where we're good, one of the key things we need to look internally and start understanding ourselves about what we're strong in, so that we can actually put our hand up if that, you know, if our skills are needed. And because of the complexity and ambiguity, we may be very unclear because things are so complex. We need to look for patterns rather than actually look at each thing in detail. And in terms of ambiguity, sometimes things are so uncharted before that we might have no reference point, and where do we go? So imagine, you know, like in the military, if a team went off to a terrain that they were unfamiliar with, and let's say their captain gets shot by a sniper. Who stands up? Who's the first one to put their hand up to lead the team? So assuming, let's say, they landed in the desert, and whoever is more skilled in the desert would put their hand up to lead that team. And he or she might be possibly the youngest member of the team. So nowadays it's not about age and necessarily you know, your authority in terms of seniority, but really it's about what skill you have. So what we're going to look this next hour is, instead of just surviving the VUCA, how can we thrive in it? How can we learn to surf this VUCA wave that's in our world right now? So let's take a poll right now, and while we're getting ready to put the poll up, I'm going to read the poll questions so that our backend will put in the poll, and Shelley will do that. So the key, if you can answer one of the above, select one of the following. My key business challenge today is changing business conditions at the hyper rate, or is it that there's insufficient talent or capability to meet my goals, or is it that the business landscape is so complex, or is it that I have such uncharted territory, there's no previous success to reference. So, or it could be all of the above, like all of these conditions are one of your key business challenges. If you can just click that on, and in about the next 10 seconds, we should have got most of our poll in. We're just waiting for another 30% people to vote. And right now I can see the poll coming up that the poll's now closed, and the results have now just come up, and the results show that a lot of you say all of the above. So it seems that VUCA has really struck you in the business world. But you can also see that there is also resources. There's this either lack of talent or capability to meet the goals. And it may be because there is not necessarily a lack of talent, but perhaps we're so used to doing things ourselves that we don't usually ask for help. So one of the key things in the VUCA world is have the humility to ask for help, because a lot of times it's not because you are not skilled, but perhaps you're just not the right person for the role. So let's take the next step forward as well. One of the key things I wanted to share with you is that this paper by Robert Hogan, published about 10 years ago, which still is applied now, but because of our awareness that organizations' fate depends a lot on managers and senior managers, because in the past it used to be command and control. And there are a lot of people who found that the manager's failure, the base rate was about 50% failure, and that's a bit scary when you think about it. And what they found in this research is that if we just do our managers, the 3 lines of research, one of this says that the concerns were that the individual differences in orientation towards one's career versus one's team or organization. So in other words, this line of research suggests that characteristics associated with career success are not the same as those associated with leading a team to success. So, and the other scary thought too is that Hogan and Kaiser reviewed some surveys to suggest that when 50% of the managers derail, they suggested that this failure rate was because managers are rarely chosen on the basis of their talent for leadership. So what is this leadership thing then? So it seems that if we were to move fast in this world, and we cannot wait for intel to come from the front line to head up to the top before decisions are made, before it's swept down for us, we need to actually make those decisions at the front line. So in order for organizations to survive now, we actually need to teach leadership at all levels, and therefore you can't kind of, I guess, fob it off to your supervisor or actually push it up to the top, which and the interesting thing too is when they talk about the dark side, I mean, since Star Wars has been the movie, the dark side of senior positions, there's a tendency that because there are fewer constraints up the top, that some of that does surface quite a bit. And because they found that career success sometimes meant that effective managers, successful managers were not effective because they had to do more external things like politicking, socializing, and networking, whereas effective team leadership actually involved motivating and communicating with the team members, managing conflict and training. Now we're finding that we actually need to train everybody up and down the levels to do that. So if you're front-facing with a customer, you need to actually perhaps consider them as your followers, because you need to actually lead them to where you want them to buy your product or your service. So So that's kind of, I guess, puts a bit of a dampener this morning, and the derailers are accelerated now because of the VUCA world. It's so volatile and complex that, you know, people who, if they were successful in climbing up their career ladder up the corporate pathway, they may not necessarily be talented in leadership. So that's why now you've seen a whole growth in these soft skills as leaders being, you know, handed down up and down the organization. And soft skills are actually the hard skills. Hard is soft, soft is hard. So I showed this slide to show that, you know, the great leaders that we know, they tend to be infused with compassion and resonance and hope, and infuse others with hope and faith. And they actually take care of themselves, mind, body, and spirit as well. So you need to take time to take care of yourself, because you need to be alert. Because as the world changes, you need you need all your 5 senses working well so that you can see the changes before you can actually do anything about it. And again, communication becomes really important, because if you are not the only one working to change a situation, you need to be able to communicate the details of what's happening, as well as excite people to want to come along with you. So these are the interesting things that we actually need to be like the, I guess, I think of the geese in Canada when they fly with that formation of the V, the lead, I guess the lead goose has to fly ahead of everybody else, but when he or she tires, he falls to the back and the new goose takes the lead. And in the VUCA world, that's becoming much more that. Who is going to step up sometimes to be that leader? And it might be you. So my company, 5 Echo, we actually deal with people at all levels so that we can get organizations to amplify their people assets by helping people get agile in their actions and remain calm in crisis, because as we say, together we make our future. So today, like I said, let's look at some of the skills that we can start looking at ourselves. And first things first, you need to look at yourself. Now, most of you are very familiar with balance sheets, maybe not, but we always think of the assets and liability of looking at a balance sheet. What if we looked at you from the perspective that you have a column of assets? What are your strengths? What are your life and business experiences? And what are your values and beliefs that have got you to where you are? And when I'm coaching senior leaders and anybody working on their leadership, I get them to keep a living document of this balance sheet so that you basically keep focusing on these areas of strengths and your experiences so that you're familiar and you can enunciate them so that people know them. Now, it's much easier to enunciate our strengths because I think that's what we're taught and rewarded. But this other part of the column on your vulnerabilities, allowing you to talk about your weaknesses and perhaps some of your limiting beliefs. And most of the time, we don't want to look at those. However, what studies show now is leaders that actually are aware of their vulnerabilities can actually share that with their team to say, I'm actually not good at these things, so who is, and can you step up to help me? And who doesn't want to help their leader? So one of these key things is communicating, first of all, to yourself. Own up to them and use this sheet as your first way of looking at it. So as you look at this sheet, I'm going to encourage you to go away, you have a handout of this, to perhaps put some time aside to actually look at this for yourself. Because once you know who you are, you know when to ask for help because you know what your vulnerabilities are. So that's to start with yourself. Now, more and more, like I said, we need to look at the inside of ourselves and also to consider that our leaders need to show their essences. And so now more and more people have to be true of themselves because people only follow people who are authentic. So if you imagine you're like an apple, most of the time we show the outside of an apple, but it's really the core of us that's really where the seed that can multiply itself. So in order to inspire people, we actually need to expose our core to inspire others. So this is this sharing and communicating of our strengths and our vulnerabilities. So the other key thing about getting true to your essence is being aware and mindful of your present situation. In the past, I think leaders used to plan that far ahead, and we used to have time to measure the past so that we can actually track the future. But now we need to be more present in the current now, because this is the only time when you can make any changes. So nice to have some historical facts, but we sometimes need to be able to see the changing situation, so we have to make decisions on the spot. And again, communicate and rally people behind us. So there's a lot of common sense, and I must say that common sense is relatively uncommon. So this is when you actually marry your knowledge of past situations that you have encountered and being present of the current situation so that you can track for changes, so that you can make a decision of what your next action is going to be. So if you're talking with customers, and more, customers are being taken from around the world. I mean, call centers take, customers from around the world, and we have sometimes are unfamiliar with some parts of the world. So more and more we're actually starting to have cross-cultural or cross-global intel, so that we can actually collaborate and teach one another. So one of the key things now is, if you're looking at this sense that there are 3 ABCs you need to remember, which is your authenticity, being present and having your common sense. But how do you lose your I to others so that you can empower them to step up? So business as usual, therefore, is done for. We really can't do it on our own, and more we have to communicate to rally others. So collaboration is now key. So now that you've looked at yourself, and now you need to look at your colleagues and other stakeholders that you need to work with, you probably need to now start to think about digging many wells before you need to draw water. In other words, do you know your network? Do you know where you're vulnerable, so that you're now going to start establishing a network of people who can support you, because you don't know when you might need them, because the situation changes so quickly. So this is a typical draft of a network map that we get people to start drafting. So just like your balance sheet is one document that I get you to keep at the top of your drawer, the other one that I get you to start actually nurturing is a network map, where you might need to think about who you might need to establish relationships with, people that you might need to manage up. How about manage sideways with your peers? How about being able to actually tap on the community through partners and maybe even suppliers and supply chains? And how about your customers? Sometimes you might actually need to get them to give you referrals, and you'll notice that there's some arrows in this network as well. And what I normally tell people to draw is the arrow more one way? Are you giving more than and they're taking more, or are they giving you more and you're taking less? So just building a network is a great way of starting to be prepared, just in case you need to rally some people behind you. And so therefore you need to understand others. So there's this is your, I guess this network map is your complacency check. If you notice that you haven't updated your network map recently, it's probably a good thing to start thinking about that. So now, as we move forward, let's look at each of these VUCA primes, and let's start with the vision. Now, the vision is how you set your VUCA compass. Whenever we're headed somewhere, we need to have a compass to direct us. So like I said, even though you may not have a lot of direct reports, and you might actually be even having a customer, you need to know what the ideal situation is for a customer and what their pain points are. So if you look at defining the VUCA compass, you need to define your current reality. What is your challenge or pain at the moment? Just like when I was asking you at the poll, what is your greatest pain or challenge at the moment? If you can define what this volatile situation is, you can then also look at the opposite of it. What if that was, if we had alleviated our pain, what does the vision that compels you look like? And paint that picture. And the way to communicate it to your stakeholders to get them on board. So as a leader, you need your followers to get excited to come on board with you. So like I said, with a block of ice, the only way for you to melt it is to put some energy into it. So you need to make, you kind of have to light their fire with a compelling place for them to move away from the pain, the painful current reality, to move towards the vision. So nowadays, more and more courses with leadership, we're talking about narrative intelligence. How do we tell stories? Because the best way to help people get a grasp of a vision that they haven't got to yet is to tell a story. Another way to kick people forward is also to tell a story about how negative their situation is so that they can move forward. So this way, it creates a dissonance so that the difference between the current reality and the ideal future is the motivation for us to make it a mission possible, for us to move forward. So more and more as leaders, we are story sellers. So we're all salesmen in the end. We sell ideas. And this is where, when you find that people are not coming along with you, perhaps you're not creating a vision that's compelling enough for them to come and come to your aid or come and assist you. So this is as true for customers as it is for a manager trying to engage his team to move forward on maybe a strategic decision that may be difficult. So that's So setting the compass becomes really important. So when you have an inspiring vision, you almost have to imagine that you have to lose yourself, that others might step up to be empowered. So therefore, tell a story and get people to move up. Like that analogy I talked to you about, a block of ice. The flame that lights the block of ice to melt the water can create enough heat to perhaps make the water steam. And if you think about when we talk about the molecules of water moving into steam, it's getting more excited and therefore they're vibrating at a faster rate. And it's the steam that turns a turbine that does the work. It's not the flame that lit the water and heated up the water in the first place. So as a leader, you're that energy source, that fire that's lighting up the water or heating up the water, that it may turn to steam, and it is the steam that does the work. So vision is not entirely just for senior leaders to deal with, but for you to be able to excite your customers as well. So the next part, which is we're looking at the next VUCA prime, which is looking at uncertainty. And with uncertainty, you need to think, oh my goodness, it's so uncertain, my current reality, I just don't know where to start. This is when you need to build on your connections. So that network map that you created, in that uncertain situation, there might be someone in your network that has gone through this familiar, it might be familiar to them, and therefore they can track a path for you to go. So if you imagine that you were a chess player, the more chess games you play, the more moves you have. So, and you can imagine a grandmaster has many more moves than a novice. So the same thing. So if you are actually looking for a grandmaster in your network map to help you with an uncertainty because there is something that you haven't experienced but they may. So one of the key things is for you to empathize with what you do know or don't know, but also empathize with the people who are affected by this uncertainty and study them. And in doing that, you start becoming more understanding, and that once you start understanding the people around you, you can empower more trust. So in this second prime, it's really important for you to understand yourself, what you may be vulnerable and not skilled in, but to be able to have the trust with some trusted expert in your network to be able to call on, who might be able to help you past this terrain. So recently I was working in the Middle East, and we were building a huge airport, and as you can tell, in the Middle East they're building so quickly that a lot of it is uncharted terrain. So they've imported a lot of expatriate experts to be able to help them build these structures. But again, it's uncertain terrain. So combining forces, there is a lot of collaboration happening and those projects for it to work. So more and more, like I said, our world is becoming much more that. We're starting to go into uncertain terrain and we need to ask for help. So again, moving forward, think of it like a dance. As if, you know, if you were having to dance with your stakeholders or your customers, you need to listen to the music, you need to dance to the rhythm. Sometimes you need to get your partner to do fancy moves, but your partner's not going to do a fancy move without you holding them safe in your arms and not walking them backwards into the violin player or stepping on someone's shoes. So it's really important to understand that you need to keep the pace going, but only lead when your people feel safe, when there's trust. So I guess in essence now you can see that being present, being able to see and hear things in your environment, being mindful of your presence gives you the ability to show yourself a little bit more, and also to feel and allow your senses to be able to access some patterns or anything that you might see, like a grandmaster playing chess. Is this something that I've done moves before or not? And if I haven't, I need to be able to rally some people to help me. So that's the second VUCA prime that we're looking at, uncertainty and understanding. So I like to think of mindful leadership like, you know, starting to have kids. When you were a parent, don't you think that one of the greatest VUCA world is when you were, you know, two single people who got married and suddenly when you had kids, your whole world turned upside down? Well, a lot of the things I'm telling you about actually works very well in business as well as in parenting. And also to herd, you know, a lot of salespeople, a lot of these techniques that we're looking at VUCA now have usually been working very well at the sales at the front line, because a lot of times salespeople actually have to motivate their customers. So a lot of these techniques, if you want to build long-term relationships, is not to have that quick kill, right? It's to be able to build those relationships. So I'm not going to go through these models, but I'm just going to show you very quickly from those two books. There's been these two models basically looking at who you are in essence as a leader, what's your ABCs, authenticity, presence, and your common sense. But put that together with how you will act as a leader, and you'll be able to actually course through this VUCA environment a lot better. Now, I'll skip through this straight to one of the R's. There's 7 R's of leadership action, and I'm going to circle the one on respect, because in that understanding your stakeholders, you need to respect people, respect their different ways of communicating, respect their values that are different, respect their traditions that might be different. So there's a lot of learning happening when we're interfacing with people that seem to be unlike us. So the more unlike they are, that's why we have conflict potentially happening. So this is one of the key things we need to do. Now, coming to the third prime, looking at complexity, and if we were to define complexity as having so much information and that we can't see the linkages. So until we can see the linkages, we don't see a pattern. So in a complex situation, what we ask you to do is step back a little bit and see whether there's a pattern to this mess. And again, if we can't see the pattern from the complexity, then perhaps we need to call on somebody who can. And again, this is where our network map comes along as well. So for instance, like I said, when I've been working overseas, these cross-cultural things, just the simple thing of making an OK sign is OK in America, and it's OK in Australia, but that's actually a root sign in Iran. So you wouldn't want to do that. So simple little pattern recognition and noticing, people's body language is really, really important. So if we looked at now, how do we like I said, move from this complexity to start looking at some way of doing some winning moves. So we get some clarity of these patterns, we can now have more strategic thinking around which move we can make. So again, this third prime is really important for us to work together. A lot of times if we can't actually deal with the situation there and then, we might need to take stock and actually pull back and say to our customer or someone to say, look, we don't have the answers, we need to be vulnerable. We don't have the answers, but can we take it away and come back with some the next steps as soon as we can? Because we need to step away, get some distance so that we can actually see, you know, which is the decisive move we need to make. So when you look at going from complexity to clarity, we need to start with seeing what rules are in play here. Do we need to make new rules? Are the old rules no longer in application now? So these are the kind of things that we need to start thinking about. And again, I suppose nowadays we keep bagging, you know, Gen Y and Gen Z and the next Gen Omega because they seem to play by different rules. And perhaps maybe we, the older generation, need to actually start looking at some of the rules we need to play in so that we can integrate all the generations, which is part of our complex world. Because really we know that in 2020 there will be 5 generations in the workplace. So going from complexity to clarity, the main thing is the overwhelming data. We've got so much, I mean, big data. I mean, I guess Google and a few other people are starting to look at how big data can be used to help us make sense. And again, big data is only useful if we can put it into a pattern. So the key thing is to be able to simplify things by making not looking at everything at once, but perhaps to look at pattern by pattern. So looking at just one thing at a time. To simplify things is really the most important thing. So if we can look at what might seem a UFO, what might be a familiar object, but it's just unidentified. So sometimes once we start saying, oh, there's a pattern, then we can actually deal with it. So for instance, nowadays, I guess there's a lot of patterns around that retailers are not selling face-to-face as much, and online is becoming one of these patterns that we're looking at. So big data is helping us understand where next are we going to head with, you know, taking our next, you know, step into the marketplace. And is the online way of thinking different in China versus in the Middle East or versus the Americas or in Australia? So just being able to start looking at patterns and making big data make sense is going to be really important for us to communicate. So that's why common sense is important, because we need to be able to get out from the dance floor, take a balcony view, take some distance so that you're not caught up with all the emotions when you're sort of caught up with all the complexities at ground level. So we need to get a little bit of distance to actually get a sense of clarity. So that's the third prime. And we really need to look at, in this 7 R's of a leadership action, what are the rules at play? What are the rules that we need to bust? And in fact, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship now in the corporate world with disruption. Disruption basically is looking at how can we look at a situation in a new way and either bust the old rules or create new ones? Or can we play within the rules but making those constraints more interesting so that we get creative within the constraints is where we're at. So what we're seeing now is more and more there's a mindset shift from just being egocentric, being self-centered, to actually looking at the collective. As I said earlier, more and more now it's a collaboration mindset. So there's a move towards a more integral humanity, and there's new rules playing. And as we are saying, the planet will suffer if we don't look to collaborate together. And more, some of you have perhaps heard of Little Bhutan, the country who is not only carbon neutral, but has planted more trees and forests so that they're actually a carbon sink. They're actually carbon negative. They're helping the lungs of the earth. So if more and more we think about what we can do so that the bigger ecosystem is helped. That's the kind of mindset that we're starting to look at in the VUCA world. So we look at collaborating and for greater good. This is where communication needs to go. So what the world needs now, it's not just love, sweet love, an old 60s song, but we're looking at what we call a 4G future. And it starts now. Think about it. We need a global understanding of all the different cultures. Like I said, there's so much to understand, and we need to ask questions and be vulnerable enough to ask. There's gender integration. More and more companies are losing a lot of women as they opt out of senior positions, and they're finding they're losing a lot of knowledge IP. So this need to integrate, gender, men and women at the leadership level is key as well. The generational collaboration across from traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, all of that is causing a lot of issues as well, because for the first time in 2020 we will have all 5 generations working in the workforce. And of course the last G on generosity, remember what I said about this evolving to an integral humanity where we really want to do something right by the planet. So this mindset shift is, if you're looking on the left here, what's not working is that in the past we're very self-centered. We plan too long-term, so we're not agile. We act in process. We test every process until every detail is marked off. We do a lot of SOPs so that everything is set in stone. And then we can, I guess, mindlessly and robotically react because the processes should run itself. And what we've been doing there is transactional. But now more and more our communication is transformational. What it needs to be is much more proactivity. We need to be mindful and present to the changing environment, and we now need to be more agile in progress. So we're not set in just a process that's set in stone, but we need to set it in jelly that we might actually reset it, reheat it, and change it quickly. And so MIT has got a new term called prototype 0.8. Not prototype 2.0 or 3.0. We need to have our prototypes 80% okay to be beta tested. And in fact, alpha testing sometimes happens at 50%. So we need to actually test our processes, our services, and even how we're actually communicating with people. Just give it a go. Fail fast and give it a go. There's a lot more social focus rather than self-focus, and this is where the world is shifting. So our communications are also shifting differently to connect that way as well. So last but not least, as I finish off on this segment on managing our VUCA world through ambiguity. Ambiguity is when the world is moving into uncharted territory where we have no reference point because nobody's been there before. It's a bit like Star Trek, right? Boldly going where no man has ever been. So the ambiguity is we don't know, it's so hazy. We've had no data before, so how can we move forward? So one of the key things is to get really courageous. And one of the key things we're looking at is we're starting to just test something out, just go out there, try it out, fail fast, fail frequently, and just move forward and progress. And if you can fail fast, frequently, you learn fast and also therefore lose less money as well. So the idea that we can become more agile to do sort of design thinking on the go. In other words, if you look at design thinking from the Stanford model here, think of yourself in a learning laboratory where you're collaborating with people. So imagine that you're going through a problem. A customer comes in and is complaining about a product that you've just beta tested. And so the first thing you need to do is you've got to empathize with them, which is really where we talked about and in our second VUCA prime. In the uncertainty, understand them. So that's where you empathize with the customer, understand, try to get as much information as you can and say, look, I want to get as many questions answered from you so that we can do the next step, which is define what are the boundaries, what are the rules here that is causing the customer to be unhappy. So we need to look at some boundaries where we can play within to help the customer get more satisfied. And what rules are we looking at? Can we get creative within these rules, or do we need to change the rules? Then we start looking at ideas. So a lot of people now are thinking on the spot, and like I said, don't be scared to pause and tell your customer or your follower or your manager, I don't know at the moment, but I'm going to find out. And take that idea and collaborate with your team. Again, use that network map of stakeholders that you can draw on, your network of experts. And then come up with something that you can try out and say, look, we haven't done this before, but we'd love if you can give us a go. And prototype and test. And don't be afraid to admit that that isn't working and try something else. So that vulnerable side of the human being is really important now. This was taken from a book by the IDEO CEO, Idris Muti. He talked about the fact that, you know, business schools and design schools should get together, because nowadays hiring a design thinker is not enough. We need to create design thinking. So as you can see, we won't really look at all the 7 R's of leadership action because I didn't really cover it. But if we even just look at one thing at a time and sort of say, if we can respect, look at that R on respect, if we can respect stakeholders, who is being affected by this change or difficulty or conflict, listen well, check what rules are at play here. Can we play within and get creative within these rules, or do we have the ability to change the rules? Can we look at the routine and see what's working and do more of it? And if the routine isn't working well, can we change it? So the next few R's, to review and reflect and reorganize any routines or rules, to test it by running it, and then going back to role model and prototype the things that work. And the cycle moves on and on and on. So if you look at the VUCA vision, if we go all the way back to the compass, we're looking at changing our mindset. Don't be afraid of VUCA. Have a bit of fun with it. Be like a child, exploring that surroundings. You know, grab a few balloons, make it colorful, drag a few more of your network to come and play with you. Empower others to help connect to that high performance, because we can't do it alone, and we need to communicate with our stakeholders. So, and before I end, the last thing to remember is, do celebrate every win, no matter how small, because you need to have a pat on the back. Just as we will fail fast and fail frequently, but when you win, just celebrate, and don't forget to do that. So on that score, this has really been a quick hyper class on how to deal with VUCA. So let's take a quick poll again. This is the second poll, and this will be the last thing before we finish for today. So I'm going to ask you to once again select one of the answers. What will you commit as your first step in your VUCA comms? By 1, is it going to be defining your key priorities so you've got something to focus on? Or 2, you're going to create a vivid vision as your own VUCA compass dealing with this business priority? Or are you 3, going to understand yourself and your stakeholders a little bit better? Start that network map to see whether you can build some experts and dig some wells before you need to draw water. How about the clarifying of patterns of, you know, what your business priority is? Are you familiar with these patterns? Are you a grandmaster of this chess game, or do you need to bring in a grandmaster to do this? And last but not least, are you needing to develop agility in your thinking and action? Do you need a course in design thinking? Do you need to actually, you know, think strategically and act and prototype as you go? So as you put into vote, it'd be interesting to see what are some of your key priorities that you're going to do first go after this course. And we're noticing that almost 75% people have voted, and let's have a look. The poll results show that it looks like we've got an equal first, you know, understanding yourself and your stakeholders, and also developing your agility of thinking and action seems to be the 2 big priorities for you to do. Well, lots of courses out there. check in with your learning and development part of your organization and see whether you can sign up for some of these courses. But first of all, a little bit of self-awareness, start doing your balance sheet and looking on your network map. So I guess that's the where we're at, and thank you for playing. I've got some resources here. It's in your handout. We've drawn a lot in this 1 hour that we've spoken to you, and I apologize, my Australian speaking so quickly, but I hope you've enjoyed this program, and I've really enjoyed sharing it with you, and I hope that it was useful. Thank you.
Yvonne, we have some questions to ask, so don't want to let people go yet. Some great questions. So in my role, it's difficult to take a leadership stand. How can I influence my manager to make the changes you speak about?
Right, yes. That is actually quite a common question, Jeff, because a lot of people are not used to, I guess, managing up, particularly if you've never managed people before and you're right up at the front line dealing with your customers. I think one of the key things to remember is step back and notice that what is the key pain points. Go all the way back to that first VUCA prime, which is looking at your volatile, difficult, painful situation, and go to your manager and say, perhaps I need some support here, because these are the challenges, and enunciate them as clearly. Use your senses, get some facts, and ask him or her to work with you towards co-creating an ideal vision of what good would look like, so that there is a pathway. And then you can say to him or her, can you help me, support me, plan our way to move from this painful position to the next, to the vision. So going from the volatility to the vision. And if you did just having that conversation, it shows some proactivity. And you can also be humble and vulnerable enough to tell your manager that I don't think I can do it alone, so some of these things might actually need your support. I might need some skills, and or I'll need my teammates to help me, because this is something we haven't come across. So it's more coming from vulnerability rather than trying to stand up and be, be counted. That's not the idea. It's more coming from, I want to collaborate, we want to fix this, we need to work together.
That's great. So it's more of a team building effort, collaboration. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being a role, sorry?
I say absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of times people think they have to take really big steps and step up as a leader. It's just being human. Just go up there and be vulnerable. That's what you need to be. Yeah.
You speak of being a role model for my team to lead the VUCA comms. I would like to implement this with my team, but I'm not yet comfortable with some of the skills. What do you suggest I do as a first step?
Well, and again, I think in the VUCA world, we tend to look at the complexity of the situation, so looking at the third prime. Let's start to get a little bit clearer. The reason why we sometimes want to fix everything at once, it's better to actually step back and say, okay, do a little balance sheet on yourself. What am I strong in and what am I not so strong in, and these are the skills that I can't do. Perhaps I can, I'll work with the HR and learning and development to see whether there's some skills you can, get skilled up in. 2, be vulnerable. Ask your team, to say, look, I've just come through this VUCA communications course, and there are some things that I'd like to implement with the team, and I'd like to share what I learned with you, but there's some skills that I'm a little bit not so good at. Who in our team can step up? So this is your opportunity again to be vulnerable and allow your team to step up. And the third way you can deal with it is perhaps if you want to start it off and learn on your own, you can also get an executive coach or get your learning and development department to work out, is there a group of people who are wanting to implement these skills with their team, and maybe even get a group coaching situation happening as well. So 1, I guess, look at your own balance sheet. What are you vulnerable in? Are you prepared to own up and get help from your team or your learning and development department? And 3, perhaps get some coaching.
Perfect. I have a question. You mentioned Gen Omega. I've never heard that expression before. You said 2020, they'll be in the workplace. Can you
Yes.
sort of define what this generation is going to be like from your perspective?
You know, I'll tell you, this is really fascinating because I think as human beings we love categorizing things, and I've been doing this workshop called Future-Proof Your Workplace in preparation for 2020, and I get people to fill out this profile sheet where, you know, after they filled it out, and then I said, okay, I'll show you all the different characteristics from traditionalists right down to Gen Y and Gen Z. And it was really interesting to find that there's a lot of Gen Ys that actually have a lot of traditionalist and baby boomer characteristics, and a lot of baby boomers who've been so used to being with technology that they are more Gen Y than some of the Gen Ys. So now I think we like to categorize people just so that we can, you know, put them in a box, but really it's not as simple as that. So we like to categorize just to say that that's how we can deal with them in the workforce. So I share this story with you because my father, he's been hearing people complain about Gen Y, and he said, you know what, every generation has their Gen Y or Gen Z or Gen Omega. It's that generation you don't understand. And he said, I was the Gen Y in my generation. He's 77, and he says, I used to love Elvis when they were listening to classical music. So I was the Gen Y, and I used to put them off. So coming to the Gen Omega, I think one of the key things we're finding is that they are definitely born with devices in their hands. I mean, if you look at a young 6-month-old, they're starting to kind of play with iPads, so that even I've actually seen a very young child try to kind of expand an image on a magazine in a dental office because they thought that it was an iPad. You know, it's just they're so used to technology. They're used to multi-screens. ADHD is really not a condition to be treated, because I think ADHD is the condition that the world will be at such a fast pace that Gen Omega and Gen Z, they probably have that attention span, that short attention span, so that they can actually deal with the fast-paced world. So
Right.
It's a really interesting dynamic. I think we're evolving to that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It fascinates me. And when I think about it, that generation will have no recollection before 9/11. If you think about that, you know?
Right.
Isn't that crazy?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, listen, Yvonne, thank you so much for your insights. And as you can see, you know, if you're interested in contacting Yvonne directly, you can email her. I didn't even ask her permission, but I'm sure you can. And her email address is CEO@Dr. That's Dr. YvonneSum.com. That's Dr. and Yvonne is YVONNE, last name SUM.com. And Yvonne is a fantastic speaker as well, so consider her for your next Association meeting or company conference. She travels the world, as do I, so I know that we could entice her to come to the States. Thank you again, Yvonne. And I even tried turning on my webcam, but it didn't work, so maybe next time. Thank you also. I want to stress to everyone that it's 1 o'clock in the morning where Yvonne is, so I think she looks amazing, and I'm telling her go to bed. All right? We hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'd like to thank our sponsors, ASUGA and Aspect, without whom this webinar series wouldn't be possible. And remember, we present these webinars every other month, so please mark your calendars for the second Thursday of July. That's July 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time here in the States. And the title is Be the Ringmaster of Your Work and Life with Joan Laughlin. Watch your email for more details. And let me take a minute to wish everybody a happy spring and happy summer coming up. It's my honor and privilege to be your host. And until next month, this is Jeff Tobe urging you to keep coloring outside the line. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.